All right, so what kind of workouts do we have here? If Jason was here, my business partner, I'd say he's a pretty simple guy, but I'm the only one, so I have to say I'm a simple guy, I guess. Maybe a simpleton, I don't know. And we like to keep things very simple in terms of how we coach people because, well, there's enough complex stuff in life, so why spend 3 hours a day trying to figure out what you're doing for a workout? Let's keep stuff pretty straightforward, pretty simple. So we basically break it down into 3 main categories. One of those has 2 types of workouts. So you've got race intensity workouts, which are going to simulate or be somewhat mimicking of a actual race. Might be group workouts for cyclists, training races for triathletes, meaning non-priority races, or brick workouts for triathletes, where you incorporate some time at race intensity. If you remember that chart that I showed you with intensities, I had noted on there estimated power ranges for sprint distance, Olympic distance, half Ironman, and Ironman. So you'd use those, build those into those brick workouts. Aerobic or moderate intensity workouts, basically just a comfortable endurance-paced workout. You're just going out and you're cruising at a pretty consistent effort, building fatigue resistance. Anaerobic workouts, technically, this is a word that would probably make a physiologist mad at me. We really view it as more anaerobic. We don't like to think of things as having on-off switches. There's dimmer switches in our bodies. So as we get up here and we start working at this higher intensity level, we're doing stuff that's increasing the challenge that we're dealing with, and we're contributing with a little bit more anaerobic energy supply. So we have moderate high intensity and very high intensity workouts. And the very high intensity workouts, mostly I use those with cyclists. The people that I would maybe use it with a little bit more in triathlon would be ITU format people, okay, or folks that did draft legal racing. Folks that don't, to me, for most people, it's not worth it. The moderate high intensity workouts, a little bit less intense, still pretty challenging. Let's take a look at some of these so that you have a better handle on that. So what I'm going to do is go through some general points on these. I'm going to call it a workout. It's really a workout that I structured myself, kind of created, so it was perfect for lack of a better term. And then we'll get into some things you'd want to look for and what I'd be looking at if somebody sent me this workout, and so that you can better understand what you'd want to look at and understand. So for an aerobic intensity workout, basically 1 to 6 hours riding aerobically. It could include pedaling emphasis drills. It can be inside or outside, although if you're getting much over 2 hours, 3 hours at most, I would be very touchy on the indoor part of it. Something important to me with this stuff, it's funny, but man, those of us that have hit 5.5, 6 hours on a trainer, man, you're never the same. Doesn't that explain me? I don't know. These can be done indoors or outside, and they can be done on all types of terrain. I find a lot of times when people do aerobic workouts, they think, it's pretty low power, I should do this on the flattest terrain I can find. Really, it's totally cool. Go out and ride in a hilly area. Yes, that means you're going to go slow up a hill. Tough noogies. You're not trying to win the world championships on your Saturday training workout here. This is a workout. You're trying to improve your fatigue resistance. You're trying to improve your aerobic fitness. It's okay to go 4 miles an hour up a hill if that's what you have to do on that particular location in that particular day. Okay. And truthfully, if the races that you're focused on, if you're half Ironman focused for next year or St. Croix, probably ought to go ride in hills pretty much every time you do a ride. Okay. All right. So straight up example here. Building up or warming up in the beginning, easy would be like walking pace. A is a comfortable aerobic level. I'll give it a 7 or so on a RPE scale. 7, meaning like about a 70%, be a better way to say it. 10 minutes of pedaling emphasis drills. You could be outside, but you could still do a pedaling emphasis drill, like work on your leg speed, 1 minute at the highest cadence you can hold, staying close to within that aerobic power range, 1 minute at self-selected cadence. Working on your fluidity a little bit there. You can do a dead leg pedaling drill where you literally pretend one leg's turned off and pretty much just pedal with the other leg. Try to improve your pedaling technique there. So there's some things you could work into a workout so it's not just a dull ride for 5 hours or something like that. Do the meat of the workout, and then 10 minutes easy to cool down at the end. Now, basically what that's going to look like, if you download that workout when you're done, you're going to get pretty much up to where you're going intensity-wise. You're going to be kind of close. And remember, power is variable, so we've got some ups and downs there. That line across the top of the graph is basically saying that's the middle of that aerobic intensity range that you calculated from your test. So you're getting up, trying to hold that intensity range, cooling down at the end. Okay? All right. Moderate high intensity workouts. So for a cyclist, to me this is doing tempo intervals or anaerobic intensity intervals that are moderately long. Triathletes, anaerobic intensity intervals. I don't do very much tempo work with triathletes because that really turns into race-specific work. And you start looking at the percentages, they shake out so that within my system, the tempo intervals really become a race intensity interval. So that's sort of built into triathletes in a different direction. And they can be inside or outside. And truthfully, any kind of interval workout is often best done inside. I'm sorry, I kind of keep forgetting you guys. I'm like so focused over here, and I'm like, oh, hey, there's people over here. So sometimes using the trainer for interval workouts is really just the best way to go all year. The exception would be, I know Peg in the middle here lives in a very rural area. She can go out and do interval workouts in totally awesome roads and not have issues with cars and stuff like that. There's a lot of people that I coach that live in Boston, New York, Chicago, places like that. And if they want to do an interval workout, they either have to drive an hour or ride an hour just to go do the workout. They can hop on the trainer and get that done in much less time and very effectively without having to deal with anything. So even though it's July and it seems crazy, sometimes using the trainer can be a good thing, all right? More specifically, just warming up. Again, could do some pedaling drills. That's not essential. It's just an option that can build into your warm-up and help you be really prepared for the work. And then the meat of the workout, in this case, 8-minute anaerobic intervals. The 190 to 210 watts there is based off of the test for our buddy Joe Watts, and then a short cool down. And if this was actually a workout, this would probably be more like a 10 or 15-minute interval workout with just 2 intervals. But you can see there's a warm-up there, getting up to that aerobic intensity level, solid interval, recovery period, solid interval, cool down. Something I would look at here is, when they were doing this workout, were they able to perform the second interval the same as the first interval? Okay, so oftentimes what you would see if somebody went a little too hard, their first interval would be appropriate. Their next interval might be the same or maybe sloping downward. Another option or another thing I would want to look at and I would want you to look at would be when you do this workout, does the interval look like a big spike on one side and it slowly slants down, indicating you went really hard and got tired, versus held a pretty steady effort. Okay, so the idea would be to come up, relatively square across the top, recover. Make sense? Sweet. That way you're getting the most out of each interval that you're doing and staying fresh to be able to finish the full work set. All right. Anaerobic or very high intensity workouts. For cyclists, this could be types of sprinting, very high intensity, 30-second to 2-minute intervals. You're pretty much flat out here. Okay. Triathletes wouldn't necessarily do all the same types of sprinting, but I would include the 30-second to 2-minute high intensity work. It can be done inside or outside. The only thing I would say is if you're doing this inside, be a little easy on the sprinting. I don't want to see people break frames. Not a good thing. I like people to do these uphill when possible. There are times when it's not possible, and then, hey, you got to go with the flat roads, but try to be flat to uphill if at all possible. Downhill, not the best. I'm sure those of you that use power have noticed when you start to work hard going downhill, it's amazing how quickly you can run out of your target range that you're trying to stay around. So using a flat or uphill section of road is really ideal for this. Plus the intensity on these is very high, so that it might lower the velocity just a little bit, which to me makes me feel a little bit better that if somebody pulls out in front of you or some other horrible thing happens, you're able to hit the brakes and no problems happen. So again, warm up, a little bit of pedaling drills, and then into the meat of the workout, generally riding aerobic. In the midst of that, 12 30-second intervals, 300 plus watts. That's for Joe Watts, remember. He was around 200 watts for his test. Math works out so that he's looking at 300 plus watts for short, very high intensity intervals. And then a short cool down when he's done. This would actually be a very good trainer workout, just as it's laid out. Now, the thing I want to show here, going back to what I was talking about before, okay, we've got our imaginary workout here. You can see with these very high intensity intervals, the rest periods are a little bit longer than they looked on that last workout. The intensity's higher. So if you think about how many people in here lift weights sometimes? Phew, for a second there, I didn't think anybody was going to raise their hand. So if you do a really tough, intense set, you kind of need a little more rest, or you're not going to be able to do that next set very well. Same kind of thing here. You're working really hard. You need a little bit more rest between those intervals so you can do each one really well. In essence, when you're doing an interval set on a bike, it's sort of like doing a strength set. The difference is that instead of doing, say, this is these are relatively short intervals. Instead of doing, say, 6 repetitions of strength training, it might be 300. in just a couple minutes. Or maybe a better way to put it would be 180, say 90 RPMs. You're doing 90 revolutions in a minute, right? Making some sense there. So very short, very intense intervals, working very hard. One thing that I really would like about this, if somebody sent this workout to me, is I would look at it and say, great, they didn't overdo it early on. They got where they were trying to go from a power perspective. This purplish line is going to be that 300 watt unit we were just talking about a minute ago for Joe Watts. So we got up there, recovered well, whammo, gets the next one up there. Gets the next one up there, and all of a sudden we're noticing there's kind of a trend here. They're at least hitting the line and actually able to creep it up a little bit. So to me, this would say this person understands their pacing pretty well. They understand that for these short, very high intensity intervals, there may be some leeway there. You know, the difference in what you can do from, say, 30 seconds to 2 minutes is much different than, say, what you could do from 15 minutes to 60 minutes. Okay? So what you can do for those longer efforts is much more similar than what you can do for these shorter efforts. So in essence, you have a range that you're shooting for initially, and you've got to tune that just like strength training again. Okay? So you went and you did that 8 repetition set at the gym, and you wrote down, I used 100 pounds for that. Maybe for doing a 10 repetition set later that week or the following week or 2 weeks later, you'd want to be looking at, say, 80 pounds or 85 pounds or whatever it was. Okay, so it's almost like you're trying to create that type of tuning in your mind. That's something that can be useful to log into for yourself in a training log, or it can be just something to kind of become more aware of in that whole mindfulness concept I was talking about earlier. Hang on just a second, okay? So the idea is that you're gradually trying to increase that workload if you can. Okay, at the very least, I'd want to see it flat across the line. If possible, gradually sloping up. Okay? All right, race intensity workouts. So for cyclists, to me, the best way to do this is a group workout with people who have equal category or slightly higher. They don't necessarily be the same age range, but at least similar ability levels to slightly better than you are. So it's something that's going to push you very well. Could also be a non-priority or a training race. You guys maybe Wells Ave, you know, different training criteria, Wampatuck, stuff like that. Or kitchen sink workouts, which basically are blending a lot of those intervals that we were just looking at. You know, shorter, very high intensity intervals, moderate intensity intervals, blending all that stuff together. For triathletes, really it's bricks or doing non-priority races. So maybe your focus next year is Timmerman. Maybe Greenfield would be your last race-like workout. Okay. These to me are really universally best done outside. I don't really like, if possible, to see people do these inside. The exception would be if you're somebody who was feeling really, really crazy and decided you were going to sign up for like New Zealand, I think it is. You know, so you're doing your Ironman very early in the year, or New Orleans, for example, is a 70.3 series race. So you'd be doing a big race, you know, in April. Living in New England, you're going to get stuck doing big workouts indoors. You might have to do race-like workouts indoors. Group ride for a cyclist, like I was saying, basically just heading out for Joe Watts. He's going to start out trying to be aerobic, but he's really going to let it go totally, I'm going to call it fartlek style, which basically just means all over the place based on what the group's doing. They're sprinting for town lines, cool, so are you. People are attacking on climbs, cool, so are you. People are dropping you, you're chasing like a madman. Okay? You're dropping people, they're chasing like a madman. It's really a bunch of different intensities blended together, very much like a race. I will occasionally put a limit on certain things on these. If somebody's very prone to working extremely hard and will turn a group ride into you guys I'm sure have heard this, the Wednesday Night World Championships or something like that, right? Every now and then, those people dig themselves a hole too quick. They do too much work and they spend all their energy in, you know, group workouts. And, you know, hey, Saturday and Sunday are more important than Wednesday. So in that scenario, I might say to someone, okay, cool, you know, go ahead and do that group workout. You can sprint a few times, give them a specific number depending on who they are, and you can try and do a few of the hills on the ride at over X power. Other than that, try to hold the brakes back. Not always easy for me to say, not always easy for them to do, but keep that in mind. If you are someone who's prone to going into an event like that, like a group workout, and trying to be a hero, sometimes it can be okay to give yourself a little bit of a limit. But for folks that have a pretty good grounding in reality, aren't willing to spend all their matches on a training workout, being very variable within that workout, exploring all parts of it, working hard, working less hard, really fun way to do a good race-like workout. And what you can see in the graph is that that's going to look like it's all over the place, just like an actual road race. So you've got high power, you've got low power, you've got periods where it's kind of sustained. You know, you've got different things happening, maybe an attack here that settles in a little bit. So there's a lot of different things happening in there. For a triathlete, be a brick workout. So maybe they're going to do a 50-mile ride. They're going to warm up into the ride over the first couple of minutes. First 25 miles for Joe Watts, he's going to ride at 130 to 150 watts roughly. His aerobic range, he gets to the final 25 miles of that ride, and he's going to ride at an estimate of his half Ironman race intensity, and he's going to hold that 154 to 174 watts. And when I say a range like that, remember what I was saying before. You're trying to do the mental mode here, and you're looking at those numbers saying, okay, I want to mostly see these kind of numbers. It doesn't mean it's absolutely perfectly within those all the time, okay? You're just trying to mostly see those kind of numbers. And then they move right to a 5-mile run at his run-specific half Ironman race intensity, which he would have determined via testing there. So what you can see here for this triathlete is that their workout, they kind of got right into a groove here with their aerobic intensity. They're cruising along real nice. They got to that 25-mile point, pick it up just a little bit. Now they're cruising along, holding that intensity nicely through the tail end of the ride before they start their run. Okay? All right, so that's all cool. Those are neat workouts. Well, I got some cool workouts I like to do. What can I do to kind of understand what I did better when I get home and I download that workout, or just when I'm thinking about creating my own workouts? Number one, and this is to me probably the most important thing, if there's something that I feel bad about as a coach, it would be when somebody emails me something and says, I did this, I think I did it right, but man, I'm freaking out because this, or this. It doesn't feel like the power is quite right, or it doesn't feel like I'm doing something right. Well, were you in the spirit of the workout? Were you trying to execute it as well as you could, and were you trying to do the things that are needed to happen in that workout? If it's an aerobic workout, did you go out there and you ride generally aerobic, or did you go out there and halfway through the workout after you got chased by a dog, you thought I felt good, and you time trialed the rest of the day? Those two workouts are incredibly different. An hour of aerobic riding versus an hour that was supposed to be aerobic riding that's 30 minutes of aerobic riding and 30 minutes of time trialing. Totally different in how you're going to recover from that, how you're going to feel the next day, doing different types of workouts. Very different experience. So were you within the spirit of the workout? And that may mean, were you close to the zones that you were trying to target? Did you do an appropriate number of intervals? If you didn't, why not? So if you started a workout and there were supposed to be 6 intervals and you did 10, did you just have a brain hiccup, or did you feel ridiculously good and think you were a hero, or did you just forget? Most of the time it's the latter, but what happened there? Why did it happen? Did you did you do the correct amount of work overall, the volume of work? So if the ride was an hour, did you go out and ride 90 minutes, or did you ride 30 minutes, or did you ride an hour? Actually, let me go back to those before I get into the last one. Within those things, look over the workout, get a sense of what happened out there and whether or not you were in the spirit that you were trying to achieve. Were you doing what you were trying to do? And if you were, great, very cool. Even if that means you did 1 or 2 or 3 intervals less or more than you were supposed to do, or if it means one of your intervals got cut a little short, so be it. If most of the workout you were doing was in the appropriate spirit, if you will, that was a pretty darn good workout, okay? At the very least, you learned some positive things from it. If not, if it wasn't in the appropriate spirit, there's probably something we need to adjust there, or you need to adjust. It may mean that the workout was too hard, it's going to take too long to recover from. It may mean that you didn't do enough work. Maybe we need to adjust something later on. Maybe, I almost hate even telling this story, but a woman that I coach did her first Ironman, and she didn't have a power meter. If she had, this would have been corrected immediately, but she didn't. And all her friends were telling her, you got to ride your bike a lot. So she had no thoughts at all when she was getting a workout from me, and she was interpreting it, like that brick workout. Oops. Right, so ride 50 miles total, ride the first 25 miles ride the final 25 miles at this intensity. How many people figured out she rode 75 on that ride? She did 50 and then she did 25. So when it got to 100 and like 60 were at race intensity, yeah. That was when she asked me. She's like, are you sure 160 miles? And I'm like, no, I'm not sure about that. That's not what I was asking at all. But my point there is, that wasn't in the spirit, okay? Luckily for me, she was good about all of her other stuff and recovered very well, tapered well, and actually had a very good race. But, I mean, with the power meter, had she been sending me those files or had she been reviewing that on her own, she would have picked up on that. That's not in the spirit of the workout. So that's something that you're trying to pay attention to within your workouts, and you're trying to really look back on and see, okay? It's not, you don't necessarily have to take every workout you do, go back and analyze the bejesus out of it. Just make sure that it was in the right vein, that it was doing what you were trying to do. Make sense? Cool. So the last thing that I would say is great to look for using the software, the WKO software in particular, is what I'll call decoupling rate. And really that's best for aerobic workouts or for triathletes, for race intensity workouts, fair for cyclists in that regard. Basically what we're looking at here, okay, is how heart rate and power relate. So heart rate definitely can be a little flaky and it can relate to a lot of things. So maybe you're dehydrated, maybe it's really hot, maybe you're really hungry, maybe you had, what's that crazy drink they're trying to take off the market that's got like ridiculous... What? Yeah, that's, maybe you had 3 cans of that before your workout. But all these things, except for the loco stuff, all these things actually relate to fatigue. So if you're getting dehydrated, to me, that's a factor of fatigue in that you could have been hydrating yourself better. It's causing you to become more tired. Could just straight up be that you aren't prepared for that workload. But what you'll see when you look over your workout is that your heart rate will be kind of, bumping around wherever it's going to be, and your power rate will kind of nosedive off the face of the earth. Or conversely, if you're totally focused and zoomed in on your power would be relatively horizontal, and you'd maybe be feeling a little bit run down the second half of the ride. But then when you got home and you downloaded, you looked at your heart rate would be like going straight up. You can kind of see it in the this way. Let's see here. You can kind of see it in this file. Okay. Take out this part. Don't look at the last little bit there because he was kicking it to the finish. But if you generally look at this, okay, his power output's, I'm going to call it relatively stable. There's a little bit of a hook. We'll describe that in a minute. But his heart rate's sort of stable to slightly going up for a lot of the ride. So it gives you an idea of, okay, how was I doing? How's my body responding? Figuring heart rate is basically an indication of the stress of the workout, whereas the power is just straight up what you were doing. So if you're looking at an aerobic ride that you did, maybe you went out and you're a cyclist and you're training for Killington or something next year. Connecticut stage race has a really long 80-mile day for most categorized bike racers. That's a pretty long day. So you're thinking, I got to do some long rides. You go out and you do 4, 5, 6 hour training ride. And you get home and you look at it, you're like, wow, I had this 9% power to heart rate ratio or decoupling rate. That's indicating you were having some issues. Either you were one of those things, you were getting low on fuel, dehydrated, fatigued in general. Something was going on there that needs to be addressed, or that you at least need to be cognizant of and recognize that you still got some work to do. If, on the other hand, you went out and did that ride and your power to heart rate was, say, 2%, which would be miraculously good on a ride that was 6 hours long, for example, that would be a pretty good indication that you nailed everything. You're totally gelling. You're in a really good place. So to me, it's a neat variable to be able to look at that keeps the power numbers in at least a little bit more context relative to your physiology. Some people don't like it because they feel like heart rate's just totally junk. To me, 30 to 40 years of people training and getting better with a heart rate monitor says something. Okay, it's not total junk. It's at least got some usefulness. So power just gives it a little more context. So this type of a relationship can be a really neat one to look at and give you a better understanding of how you're progressing over time. Maybe you did that workout. Say you did a 4-hour ride in June and then you did another one in July and the decoupling rate was better. Hey, at the very least you probably hydrated yourself better along the way. Otherwise you're seeing some improvement there in your cardiovascular fitness. So that's a nice thing to see and a nice way to be able to see it visually for you.
These programs you were talking about calculating that?
Yeah. Yep. All right, so let's get into some talk about racing here. And you can use a power meter for a lot of aspects when it comes to racing. It can be reconnaissance. I was getting into that a little bit before, just mentioning, maybe you have a friend who's got a race course that you're going to be doing. They did it before. You can look at their power file and get a sense of what's shaken down on that course. You can also use it from a pacing perspective, and that's something I really want to focus in on here for a second. Number one, I wasn't sure. I was kind of anticipating that there may be a bigger, or maybe like a 50-50, 60-40 kind of a split of cyclists and triathletes here. So I was wrong, but I wanted to show a little difference, which is that within cycling, in a time trial, so a pretty stable effort, you can really be a little bit more aggressive. 2 reasons. You're done. That's the race. Whether it's 40K or if it was a really long time trial. There used to be an almost 60K time trial in Western Mass. That was pretty cool. If you're doing the time trial, it's done when it's done. You don't have to go run anywhere. So you can spend a little more energy on that event. which means you can be a little more aggressive in your pacing. What that kind of creates is a very shallow J. Some people just call it J pacing, but basically it's kind of a hook in there, where you're starting, you're getting up to speed, you're settling into a pretty consistent rhythm through the middle. Most people fall apart in the middle, they kind of lose focus. It's not really getting tired unless they totally blow it out. Usually it's just that people get in the middle and say, you know, oh man, I forgot that project for work. And then they're like, oh God, I just spent 2 minutes pondering that. And you know, in a 10-mile race, 2 minutes of not working hard is a problem. And then kick into the finish very aggressively. Again, you don't have to run anywhere, so that's totally cool to do. And what I have on here, the black boxes overall are just, you know, if you distributed your effort perfectly, this is roughly what we're looking at. The blue line is, oops, not good. The red line would be very solid pacing. So this person here in this time trial got up to speed pretty quickly. They started to settle down, held a nice consistent effort level, and they were able to kick it up over the last third to quarter and finish pretty solidly. This other dude started really aggressively. You know, they were all jacked up. They saw a guy they wanted to beat, thought they were a hero, and totally drilled it. And halfway through, it was game over. And they bottomed out. Triathlon's very similar, but it's much more even, because after the fact, you need to go run somewhere. Okay? So although the concept is pretty similar, that you're trying to stay relatively flat, if anything, it might kick a little at the end before settling the last quarter, half a mile or so. But generally speaking, triathlon's much flatter than an ideal pacing curve on the bike. Same thing though, if you start out too aggressively, you're going to get somewhere around the middle, start to fade and crash off, ending up with a worse performance. When you're doing a race, you want to keep that in mind and not let yourself get overexcited or ahead of yourself. Ironmans are the biggest culprit of that. People get out of the water, people are freaking out. There's the wetsuit strippers, there's the people in transition changing your clothes for you, putting sunscreen on, combing your hair, it's crazy. And then you get out on the bike course and you're thinking to yourself, every person I know might have just flown 1,000 miles to see me do this race. And I'm not going to be the guy who goes out of here at 15 miles an hour. So you off like a bat out of heck, and then there's all kinds of people around you because there's 2,500 people in the race, and the next thing you know, you're 50 miles into the race and you've been 100 watts high. That's exaggerating, but that usually spells a really long 26 miles. So that almost sounded like somebody had done that in here. I don't know, anybody? So again, the idea there is you're trying to be very stable in your pacing, maybe a very slight edge up in a shorter triathlon, sprint Olympic distance, over the final third to half with a little bit of a dip at the end would be ideal. Just the last quarter to half a mile or so as you kind of get ready for transition, take your feet out of the shoes, stuff like that. Again, that blue line, you don't want to be starting too aggressively. It's going to be a long walk or a very slow 5, 10K half marathon. So this is a concept that to me is kind of useful to have in mind. I call it variably linear pacing, which is kind of a contradiction, and it's intentional. Basically, after about the first quarter or so, right, he got it. So after about the first quarter, you're really, you're in a cycling race and even in triathlon, there's a slight aim there to be at least stable, if not slightly up. I wanted this line to be a little flatter, the red line. I couldn't do it. I didn't have good enough mouse skills. But the idea there is that your effort level is gradually climbing, okay? But power is variable, and the course is variable. We don't race in vacuums. So to me, this is where the pacing stuff I was just talking about takes a little bit of a curve, and why I put this slide in here. So that's great, Will. I'm going to go out and I'm going to try and stay pretty stable, but what if there's a really big hill halfway through? Okay, so be it. You have your race plan that you're going to execute based on the distance of the race, whether it's a triathlon or a bike race. When you get to that segment of the race with this big hill or this nasty headwind section, you're going to let your power creep 5 to 10%, okay? Let it go up a little bit when you're going slowest, meaning if you're working really hard or if you need to work really hard because it's an uphill, a headwind, increase your power just a little bit, 5 to 10%. You're going downhill, you have a tailwind, let it come down 5 to 10%, around that number you're shooting for, okay? Make sense? The reason there is that if you're going really, really fast, you're covering a given section of road in a relatively short period of time. So if you work really hard to cover that little section of road, or that section of road, whatever it is, at a faster rate and you're going 32 miles an hour, you're probably not going to gain that much time. But if you're going up a hill and you're doing that same, say, 1 mile section of road, you're only doing 6 miles an hour, and you work a little bit harder, you might save 30 seconds as opposed to, say, 10 seconds. So you just burned a ton of energy trying to go really fast in a really fast section of the course. You saved yourself like 5 seconds. Or you can work a little bit harder, burn a little bit of extra energy on a really slow section of the course, save yourself 30 seconds, and then recover a little bit and end up netting, say, 25 when it's all said and done. And you can still run fast, okay? So you're trying to use a variable mindset based on what the environment is, but with the general rule of thumb that I'm going to gradually go faster. I'm going to be working harder as the day goes on, okay? So keep that in mind in general. To me, it's an important concept because I think oftentimes people think, I got a tailwind, I'm going to drill it. I can do 35 right here. This is awesome. And then they hit a hill and they're doing, 3, and this is like the kidney came out and stuff like that, and it's ugly, So that's to me, it's just, if you take nothing else from tonight, please carry that forward. All right, so let's take a look at this for a second. We've got an Olympic distance triathlon here for Joe Watts, and remember his test power is 200 watts. So his Olympic distance triathlon intensity, we're going to estimate that out to about 174 to 194 watts. Now, the catch to this, I would say, is, this is a vacuum here, right? Ideally, Joe Watts would have been doing workouts. Remember that race-like workout? He would have been doing his brick workouts, and he would have been factoring in some Olympic distance triathlon intensity within those workouts. Maybe he would have discovered that, geez, my fatigue resistance, my ability not to slow down is higher than I recognized. And he'd be able to go ahead and maybe, edge that up a little bit. Or conversely, maybe his fatigue, he's new to the sport. He doesn't have a lot of volume in him over time. Maybe for him, his fatigue resistance is actually really low, and this would make him tired. So keep this in mind that this is an example. Ideally, you're going to incorporate these things in workouts and be able to tune based on that. So what they'd be looking at here is saying, okay, beginning of the race, around 174, 184 watts, settling in. Remember that graph I showed a couple seconds ago with the distribution graph with the blocks? So pretty stable through the beginning, a little bit of a bump, and then the end, chill out a little bit, and I don't want to say relax, but basically. So here's an actual race. This was actually Providence, I think last year, might have been this summer. The woman who did this had a test power of about 235 watts. So you can see I just kind of cheat sheeted down here. 180 watts, 204 watts would have been right on for her half Ironman race intensity based on her testing. So you can see this first half here was a whoops, 219. Yikes. So she recognized that, slowed down a little bit. Second half, 195. So she did better in execution on the second half. The miracle here is that she didn't blow up. And the reason for that goes back to the fatigue resistance thing I was talking about. This is where it gets a little more complicated because it's an actual human being and not Will drawing a perfect little graph. She has about 8 or 9 years worth of pretty serious endurance training, several Ironmans under the belt. So she's got a lot of ability to resist getting tired. So even though she kind of overworked it here, she was able to relax a little bit, do her nutrition really well, hold it together, end up running very well, qualify for Clearwater at the time. So I guess it was last year. So the key thing here is that even though you screw up on occasion, you can bail yourself out if you recognize it and slow down. But if she hadn't done that, maybe that, I can't remember exactly, I'm going to say top 3, 4, 5 age group finish would have been a top 1 age group finish. So even though this looks like it was a good execution, she can look back with her power meter after the fact and recognize that, geez, it felt a little wonky, it felt a little fast. I should have adjusted a little bit earlier. I shouldn't have let myself get so excited here early on. Stay down in a more sensible range and race out the day at a stronger level on the run. Okay? All right, so this would be a 40K time trial. So this is for you bikers in the group. Similar mindset. We're going to use Joe Watts again. So he's got that 200 watt test power. That means 40K TTR. My term for race intensity for a 40K time trial. 186 to 194 watts. Similarly, would have experimented a little bit, tested this out in workouts, tuned it a little bit. But for example's sake, he then lay out his plan. I'm going to try and do these things. The one change here is that in a bike race, those first 2 to 3 minutes, ideally on the short end of that, you got to get up to speed. So he's going to have, if this was, if you really wanted to break this down to small numbers, you could say he might be 250 for 1 minute or something, and then settle it right down. But the idea there is that he's keeping himself in a pretty stable range, and when he gets to the end, unload, because you don't have to worry about running. Okay, so flat out, full gas at that point. So this is actually I think it was about a 16-mile time trial, if I remember right. The gentleman in question had a power in his test at 346 watts. So for a race this long, that's so close. 10 miles versus, I think it was 16, like I said. Wait a minute. No, I must, either I pulled the wrong, I messed up on something there. But anyway, I think this was a 16-mile race. The numbers don't add up, so I'm thinking I pulled something from a wrong spot. But the key thing there would be that the power range would be very close, because remember I was saying if you're talking like 15 minutes to an hour, the difference is not very much, maybe 5% over that whole time span. Whereas 30 seconds to 2 minutes, we'd be talking a really big difference. So he was trying to be pretty close to his 3:46 through that whole time trial. And he did a pretty good job. He was a little high, 3:59 in the first half, and 3:33, those might be a little off, but as I remember, it's pretty close. Over the second half, he has a fading problem. He's the guy who always, in the middle to second, third, I'll say, fades for a little while and just kind of, I mean, I can't say that he spaces out, but I can say that he just loses focus a little bit and always manages to kick it late at the end. So for him, he could look at this and say, okay, cool, you know, I started a little aggressive and I did it again. I got to make an adjustment there. So he's able to look at this file after the fact, get a sense of what he actually did out there, how he performed it, and maybe, I say maybe because it's been several years and he hasn't fixed it yet, maybe make an adjustment there and be able to fill in that middle section a little bit better so that he's holding that power a little better over that middle period and going a little bit faster overall. Okay?